Poland and Portugal lie so far apart they seem to belong to different Europes. Portugal faces the Atlantic, where Europe gives way to the ocean. Poland faces the steppe, where Europe thins out and must constantly have to defend herself. Portugal is a caravel, a broad-bellied vessel bringing crusade and commerce to Saracens in distant seas. Poland is a winged hussar, crushing Ottoman armies in the open plain. And yet, in the 17th century, these two distant kingdoms were brought together by the same historical moment. The 17th century opened in crisis. The 30 Years' War shattered Central Europe. The Spanish Habsburg monarchy was overextended. France was rising, but cautiously, and Sweden was transforming itself into a Baltic empire. All certainties were gone. Dynasties survived not simply by force, but by managing alliances, faith, and perception. Portugal and Poland understood this early, because both were vulnerable in different ways. Portugal's vulnerability came from subordination. Since 1580, Portugal had been ruled by the Spanish Habsburgs. Its empire remained global, but its interests were routinely sacrificed to Spanish wars. Portuguese ships became targets in conflicts that were not Portugal's own. Dutch and English attacks on the empire were the indirect cost of Madrid's enemies, and Lisbon paid for decisions made elsewhere. What had begun as a dynastic union increasingly felt like imperial extraction. And under the policies of the Count-Duke of Olivares, that pressure intensified. Olivares' attempt to centralize the Habsburg monarchy and distribute the burden of war across all its realms treated Portugal less as a partner than as a reservoir of men, money, and ships. New taxes, military demands, and administrative interference eroded the autonomy Portuguese elites believed they still possessed. When Portuguese nobles known as the 40 Conjurados, or the 40 conspirators, moved against Habsburg rule, they did so with calculation rather than desperation. They overthrew Spanish authority in Lisbon, symbolized by the removal of the Habsburg governor, Margaret of Savoy, Duchess of Mantua, granddaughter of the Spanish king, marking the rejection of a political order that no longer protected Portuguese interests. The conspirators turned to John IV of Portugal, then Duke of Braganza. John was not a natural revolutionary. He hesitated deeply before accepting the crown. A domestic and reflective man devoted to music, order, and continuity, more inclined to compose hymns such as Adeste Fideles, as later tradition would have it, than to lead rebellions. He understood that independence meant permanent danger. Spain would never accept it quietly, and Europe would not rush to Portugal's defense. Once crowned, John IV made a choice that revealed how seriously he took legitimacy. The war for independence proved long and uncertain. Spain pressed the frontier, resources were strained, and Portugal stood largely alone. Holding together a fragile coalition of nobles, cities, and overseas interests mattered as much as winning battles. Victory was not assumed, survival had to be justified. It was in this context that in 1646, John IV placed the Portuguese crown at the feet of Nossa Senhora da Conceição, or Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, declaring her the true Queen of Portugal. Portuguese kings would rule, but they would never again be crowned. They would be acclaimed, but never coronated. It was a political act of the highest order, a claim to sovereignty grounded not just in ancient inheritance, nor in foreign recognition, but in a legitimacy no European power could revoke. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was vast, aristocratic, and fiercely proud of its freedoms. It had emerged from what Poles later remembered as a golden age, not unlike Portugal's own imperial zenith before the catastrophe of the Battle of Alcácer Quibir. where King Sebastian was lost in battle in the arid plains of Morocco and confined to messianic myth, while his death opened the way for Habsburg rule over Portugal. The Commonwealth was a political order born from the Union of Lublin, which fused Poland and Lithuania into a single elective republic. Like the Habsburg Union that joined Portugal to Spain in 1580, the Union of Lublin created a composite state, a shared crown but separate political traditions. It was a Rzeczpospolita, a state owned by its political nation, the Szlachta, whose privileges defined the system. Their political culture was shaped by Sarmatism, a line that portrayed the nobility as descendants of ancient Iranic steppe warriors. Clad in their flowing gontush and curved sabres at their sides, they weren't merely nobles but quite literally kingmakers. In the Commonwealth, the crown itself was elective. These freedoms, the famous Golden Liberties, defined the political identity of the Commonwealth. Taxes and armies required the consent of the Sejm, shaped by local Sejmiki, and prone to paralysis through the liberum veto, which allowed any deputy to halt proceedings and dissolve the session, an extreme form of parliamentary obstruction. Liberty was real, but so were its costs. By the mid-17th century, the Commonwealth was overstretched. Its decentralized institutions struggled to mobilize money and men at speed. The famous noble levy was obsolete. Magnates dominated vast estates, while royal authority remained deliberately weak. The Khmelnytsky Uprising exposed the Commonwealth's deepest fractures. It was not only a rebellion against taxation or military abuse, but a clash of social orders and cultures. Polish feudal nobility and Catholic elites versus Cossack traditions of autonomy, orthodoxy, and steppe egalitarianism. The Polonization of Ruthenian elites sharpened resentment, leaving many Cossacks alienated from a state that claimed them but did not fully include them, an experience Portuguese nobles under Olivares might have recognized. The Commonwealth emerged weakened, and its neighbors were watching. Then came the Deluge. In 1655, Sweden invaded for Baltic dominance, dynastic ambition through the Vasa line, and the clear knowledge that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was divided and slow to react. The collapse was swift. Cities surrendered, magnates defected, and the Sejm fell silent. The Republican state, so proud of its liberties and noble freedoms, nearly disintegrated. Yet even as the political order faltered, the culture of the Szlachta remained. A world of sabres, duels, and fierce personal honor, where the fate of the Commonwealth seemed to hang not only on armies and diplomacy, but on the courage of its nobles. It was from this brink that John II Casimir Vasa made his Marian vow in Lwów, proclaiming the Virgin Mary Queen of Poland. The act drew its power from the defense of the Jasna Gora monastery, where the Black Madonna of Częstochowa had become a symbol of resistance amid collapse. Portugal crowned Mary from a position of stability. Poland crowned her when the Sejm was silent, the Szlachta was divided, and the Commonwealth's cherished liberties could no longer save the state on their own. To understand why John II Casimir Vasa responded as he did, it helps to remember that he was just once a spare prince, the younger brother of Władysław IV, and so he was never truly groomed to be an inevitable ruler. In the 1630s, Casimir entered the Society of Jesus or Jesuits as a novice, embracing monastic discipline before abandoning it. In 1643, Pope Innocent X made him a cardinal, an extraordinary honor for a lay prince. But Casimir soon renounced the post, unwilling to commit perpetually to the Church. He then turned to war. During the 30 Years' War, he sought a soldier's career in Habsburg service, where one can imagine the restless prince leading swift cavalry in the style of the Zaporizhian Cossacks, masters of the steppe. All of this happened before he became king. Casimir moved between cloister, battlefield, and court because nothing yet forced him into a single identity. As the younger brother of a king in a turbulent Europe, he had status without destiny, free to experiment with faith, violence, and freedom until the crown finally fixed his role. This restlessness alarmed Cardinal Richelieu, chief minister to Louis XIII of France. Richelieu's policy of containing Spanish influence depended on fixed allegiances and legible chains of command. Princes were expected to belong clearly to one camp, but Casimir Vasa did not. Casimir had sought Spanish Habsburg service and in 1638 was being positioned for advancement, possibly even as a candidate for the Viceroyalty of Portugal. His travel plans reflected this alignment. He was expected to proceed via Spanish-controlled Milan rather than through Genoa, signaling formal attachment to Madrid's influence. But Casimir moved freely through northern Italy, blurring the distinction between official mission and personal maneuvering. In Richelieu's Europe, that ambiguity was intolerable. Italy was not neutral geography, it was contested diplomatic terrain. Milan meant Spanish power. Genoa, an independent republic, suggested flexibility. A Vasa prince with Habsburg connections, loose itineraries, and unclear intentions represented a risk to the interests of France and threatened to jeopardize his policy of cutting Spanish power. After leaving Genoa by sea, Casimir landed on the French coast near Martigues, at which point Cardinal Richelieu acted. He was arrested by French authorities not for treason, but for being politically unclassifiable. The irony was striking. John IV spent years negotiating for the release of his own brother, Don Duarte, imprisoned by the Holy Roman Emperor for serving him while being brother to the rebellious Portuguese king. Much as Vladislav IV Vasa had earlier worked across Europe to secure the freedom of his own brother, Casimir, from Richelieu. He was confined first at Château de Vincennes, then transferred between different French holdings. The message was unmistakable. In a Europe still stabilizing after decades of war, mobile dynastic actors without firm allegiance were liabilities. Casimir was released only when circumstances changed. Portugal had secured French recognition. John IV was accepted as King of Portugal. The Braganza dynasty established. Casimir was no longer useful, nor dangerous in that equation. He returned east and ruled Poland through catastrophe and deluge. When he abdicated, the House of Vasa ended with him. He withdrew from power and returned once again to a religious life, as if the circle had finally closed. Portugal's story ended differently. The royal House of Braganza, founded by a reluctant king, endured. The Polish royal House of Vasa ended with a turbulent one. Portugal was dynastic. Poland was elective. Portugal could refuse crowns. Poland could not. Decades later, a final irony appeared. During the War of the Polish Succession, foreign courts once again treated the Polish throne as an open question. Among the names quietly circulated was a Braganza prince, the brother of John V of Portugal, and thus a great-grandson of John IV. The logic was familiar. Poland's elective monarchy invited outside claimants. Catholic lineage made the Braganzas acceptable. Dynastic prestige made them plausible. But this time, Lisbon said no. Portugal had learned what Poland never had the luxury to learn in peace, that crowns offered by others may come at a high price. The Braganzas had fought too hard for sovereignty to be gambled in Europe's most exposed monarchy. Portugal and Poland stood at Europe's edges. Both crowned Mary. Both searched for legitimacy beyond force. Both also imagined themselves as chosen peoples. Portugal through the Jesuit Padre Antonio Vieira's vision of the Quinto Império, or Fifth Empire. a future spiritual empire in which Portugal would lead a renewed Christian world, and Poland through its own sense of exceptionalism as the Catholic bulwark of Europe. In both kingdoms, Catholicism became political refuge. Preachers such as the Jesuit Piotr Skarga in Poland and Padre Antonio Vieira in Portugal framed politics through providence and national mission. John IV leaned on Jesuit counsel and demobilized Portuguese church to sanctify independence. John II Casimir Vasa, who had once been a Jesuit, turned to Marian devotion when the Commonwealth itself began to dissolve. In Portugal, the church helped stabilize a restored monarchy. In Poland, it helped hold together a collapsing republic. Each began with a reluctant king. Each faced overwhelming neighbors. Each tried to anchor power in something higher than arms. But one kingdom could step back and venture out. The other could only endure. And so their histories parted, but did so through temperament, one learning when to close the door, the other keeping it open until the deluge came through. And in this lies a lesson for Europe itself. At the edges of the continent, survival is not just about strength. It is about learning when to keep the door open before history arrives and prevents you from shutting it.